Okay, here we are again. We are back. Welcome, everybody. This is the We Quit Booze Brothers, which is a podcast where we try to have honest, no fluff conversations about our various experiences of quitting alcohol. And with me, as always, is my brother Matt. Hello, Matt.
Good morning, Mark. Good morning, everyone. We are back after a short break. I have been on holiday, so went to Vietnam. So maybe I'll talk about that in the podcast. A few things that actually struck me around when you visit other countries. And part of that actually is one of the topics in this podcast today is me thinking about, what is it like in other countries? What attitude do they have towards alcohol? So I had a great time. Sorry, we had no videos for 2 weeks. We're not organized. We don't pre-record, but we're back and we're super happy to be back and we hope you're all well.
Yeah, it's been a couple of weeks, but one of the cool things about having a break between doing these for me was that you spend a bit of time living your life, just going about doing your normal everyday things, living the sober life that we talk about. And yeah, a few things came up. So the sort of evolution of this topic was, Matt, you said maybe we could talk about how you know, living in different countries or living in different cultures might somehow, impact the influence that alcohol has on you. How likely are you to be a drinker, for example? And we thought about it and we discussed it and we thought, well, I've had sort of a couple of things have happened to me over the last few weeks that I thought were interesting and worth bringing up. And we decided to broaden the conversation out to the sort of normalization of alcohol, particularly in the society that we are, sat in, that we live in, and the one that most of our listeners, live in, and sort of how that affects the way that people think about alcohol. I think how it affects the habits, the sort of behaviors in and around alcohol. And I think the first thing I'll say on it is that I have this sense that in about 100 years, maybe even less, I have a feeling that drinking will be a very similar in a very similar place to that smoking is today. The trend is headed that way. The fact of the matter is that you and I, Matt, we're I'd say middle aged, but I mean that we're not really middle aged anymore because
You're older
not
than
going
that
to
now.
look probably
Yeah.
over 100. But anyway, let's just say we're of advancing years. So we grew up. Our childhood was the 70s and the 80s, and that was a period where alcohol was glamorized. It was glamorized in the media. It was glamorized in, and there was a lot of myths around drinking. Funny enough, I was thinking about one of my first jobs. I remember the MD of the company that I worked for. I remember once complaining that I had some heartburn. He said, "Oh, you want a rum and peppermint? That will soon solve that." And alcohol was sort of positioned as this thing that could be medicinal, that it was helpful, that there were health benefits associated. I think Guinness was trumpeted at the time as being good for you because it contained iron, etc., etc. And there were these sort of myths that surrounded the way that really drove and influenced the habits. It was something that you know people would drink at lunchtimes. When I was growing up, it was lunchtime drinking was a big thing. Friday drinking was a big thing. And over the years, I feel like that has slowly ebbed away. The more that, and maybe I'm just thinking about this on the fly. Actually, I mean, it could be just the sort of the evolution of things like social media, as bad as that can be in some respects. I think what it has done is it's sort of opened up a free flow of information and a closer examination of the realities associated with things like alcohol. And where this came from for me was that we were on holiday. I know you've been to Vietnam, but we also went away for a little while, and we had some friends staying with us for the weekend, and both really good friends, and they both still drink. They both continue to drink. I wouldn't say they're heavy drinkers, but they're social drinkers. They're drinking every week. Probably a little bit during the week, occasionally, quite a lot at the weekends, etc., etc. And the wife said, just when we were talking about drinkers, they often ask me about my sobriety, and the wife sort of happened to mention about mine, and she made a comment. She said, "Yeah," she said, "drinking just isn't good for you. On any level, it's bad for you. There's no upside.
Mm.
Health wise, there's no upside." And the husband sort of rolled his eyes a bit and said, "Oh, you're just being dramatic. I've grown up with it. My parents drank all their lives. They've been fine. I've been fine." And what struck me is they probably never had the same issues with alcohol that you and I had. They never
Yeah.
had it wasn't that extreme for them. They drink because they consider that drinking is the thing that is sort of critically linked to their social life. And the husband is very defensive of it. And his argument would be, it hasn't impacted us. We've never had a problem with alcohol. We don't struggle with, alcoholism or any of those things. The reality is, it has fucking impacted them. It really has impacted them. It's impacted on their physical health. It's impacted on their weight. And I've got another story that I'll talk about in a second, but I should hand over to you. And really, what it's affected is mental health. I know it has. Heavily overweight, not fit, and this is all due to a habitual, modus operandi of weekends come around, it's big drinking, it's big food, it's lie-ins, it's relaxed during the day, it's slob out at the weekends, it's indulge in all the sort of things that alcohol relates. And my point is that we've normalized this. We've said this is okay, that society said this is okay. And it's to the point where they will hold on to that tightly. They're not prepared to let this drinking habit go, despite, and be very defensive of it, and sort of trumpet this as something that's, and almost look down on people who've quit as well. Yeah, but you probably had a bit of a problem with it, so you sort of had to quit. And I just, if you're drinking one or two a week, as we've said before, then fine. But any more than that, and if you think it's not impacting you, if you think it isn't affecting your life, you're wrong. It is, and it's a myth. And I've got more to say on it, but I'm conscious I've been speaking quite a while, so I'm going to give you a chance to say a few things. And it really struck me that yes, society's played a part in this. Yes, the media. Yes, the way we've grown up. I do think that's changing. I do think it's probably different, and I'm sure you've got some observations from Vietnam. But really, where I get to with this is that unless you're a one or two drinks a week person, don't for 1 second think that this isn't impacting you. And if you're drinking more than that, like we were, there's enough scientific evidence now that, just I was reading the other day, so just last point, and I'll hand over. The acetaldehyde, which is the basically when the body processes alcohol, ethanol is alcohol is ethanol. Ethanol goes into the system. The liver then tries to break down the alcohol, and in the process of the liver enzymes breaking down the ethanol, it produces this thing called acetaldehyde. Acetaldehyde is a highly toxic group 1 carcinogen, which is terrible for you. It's one of the reasons why drinking alcohol is so closely linked to cancers around the sort of throat, esophagus, larynx, because they're the sort of first impacted. And, just to sort of put that into context, acetaldehyde is in the same group as asbestos, it's in the same group as tobacco smoke. And this is irrefutable scientific evidence that this shit is fucking terrible for you. And unless you're doing it at a very, very low level, that it's time to quit. And I want to come back to that term quit, but I want to stop talking now. I'll hand over to you, Matt, and then get your thoughts and maybe circle back, because as always, I've spent far too long doing the intro part.
No, it's fascinating. It's interesting. In fact, I'm going to start with part 2 of my kind of notes, if you like, here, because I think I'm completely in agreement with you. So, let me give you an example of today, and this is kind of where the madness is really, and I think this is what needs to change. Is that my wife is away with the kids. She's with her sister. Kids are still on holiday, and she had some spare holiday, so Yeah, she's down in the south of France, and that's awesome. And today, there's friends coming around for lunch, and knowing knowing the people, knowing what it's like, there will be booze obviously for that lunch, and it got me thinking. It was just like we we have to get away from this culture that to have a fun life you need to drink. And it really is so ingrained. Is it, what is it that as an adult, right, you cannot go or would not expect to go to someone's house for lunch or dinner without there being alcohol? There will always be alcohol. And it's just kind of, why is it so ingrained? We just can't do it. We just can't do it. If you went to someone's house, or they're, in the situation they're going to be in today, and they said, actually we just got some fruit juice today, it would just be like, oh, well, we're not going to have any fun. And you just think, why can't we, why is that? We just can't do it, can we? We just can't do something without alcohol. And I just think it's been pinned as this magic potion that makes us suave, sophisticated, intelligent, beautiful, classy. Bullshit. Sit down as a sober person and talk to someone who's had too much to drink, and it's all the opposite. It really is. Been on the receiving end of someone who's trying to make a point when they've had a few drinks. I was that person. I was the same, and it is fine. And again, this whole thing we do here is more about our observations, and it's what we think. It's our own thoughts. We might not be right at all, but it's how we judge the situation now that we've stopped drinking. And I also wanted to make a point about advertising. Now, when I was in Vietnam, there was a lot of advertising for beer, but I'm going to move on to a different subject about Vietnam in a second. But what I really noticed in France is they really push this summer vibe. It's summer here in Europe, and there's a drink called Lillet, and there's posters everywhere saying, it basically says, Lillet and tonic, and there you go. And it's like a summer scene. And there's Ricard, which is an aniseed type drink where you add water. That's massively pushed. It's a French drink. I've drunk Ricard, right? I tell you what, it makes you drunk pretty quick because it's strong. And I've seen people get very aggressive. It's a heavy drink, and people drink it in the summer. But the advertising is there, and I kind of think, why is the advertising there? Why is that still a thing? There's so much problem. There was an article I read in the BBC News just the other day that was talking about there being possibly a change to drink culture, because still in the UK, after work drinks, the off where you have like a works do, it's still very focused around alcohol. And there's this guy, questioning it and saying, well, what if you don't want to drink alcohol? Do you lose out? Do you miss out? Are you not part of the crew? And then it was talking about how something ridiculous like 65% of workers in London feel stressed out about their jobs and relax with a drink or two after work. And that's just basically, if you have if you're in any way suffering from anxiety or or concerned about things, or alcohol does the opposite. It makes it a million times worse. But I just think it's still so acceptable. And why is it that cigarette advertising is banned? On the contrary, it's made to look like an evil product, which I think is a great thing. I still, I used to smoke, and I can't understand how smoking is still a thing these days. It's just, it was the biggest preventable death or cause of death, I think. And then I think alcohol is not far behind. And you just think, why are we still like this in society? And I think there is change. I think Gen Z, is it? I'm not very good with the generations. I think we're Gen X, but Gen Z, I think, is really changing. And actually, I saw another article today about Kentucky bourbon, how they are, sadly, because it's a business, obviously, and I wouldn't wish any sort of downfall on any business, but they are really struggling because they've lost the cool. People don't want to drink bourbon. Apparently, the whole Canada Trump tariff thing, they've destocked. So, really, really struggling. But they mentioned specifically that, a change in younger generations' thoughts and actions and regard on drinking has also been part of the downfall. But yeah, again, I'm probably going on too much, and I think I really wanted to mention Vietnam, but because I've been there on a holiday, and honestly, I would recommend it. What an incredible country! What lovely people! It's an emerging country, very different north to south. There's something for absolutely everybody in that country, and they've been through, their history has been checkered, to say the least. But what a great country. And when I was there, we visited the mountains. We went to Hanoi. We went to Saigon. We went to all these places, and we spent a few days, but at the beach actually. And they have sort of private beach lounges, but they're like $1 a day or something. So pretty much available to everyone. And very interestingly, the Vietnamese tend to come to the beach in the evening. Having a suntan in Vietnam, if you're Vietnamese, is not considered a good thing. Like it's considered that you're lazy almost, that you spend too much time in the sun. So they come in the evening. But I digress. So where I wanted to go with it was, when I've been to private beach clubs in the south of France, which be honest, I absolutely detest. It's just a gross show off of pretentious everything I hate. Honestly, it's a melting pot of wannabes who click their fingers and order more rosé, more champagne. It's just grotesque, really. What I noticed in Vietnam was that where we went, there was none of that. It was still, you know, very much orientated around, family, around. But I just thought how nice it is, how nice it is to be in places where it's not all about the booze, and it's not all about, who's ordering the most expensive bottle of champagne on the beach. And I know there's a place for that, but for me that was fantastic. And you know drinking fresh coconut, sat looking at paradise, which it was for me just the best thing.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I mean, the reason why it's pushed so much and why the advertising exists is because culturally, and I think it probably stems right back from the sort of evolution of Western society, Western culture, which is, based, a lot of it is in sort of theological idea. I mean, if you're sort of a lot of apart from things like Muslim religions, etc. A lot of religious doctrines, Christianity particularly, the sort of the bedrock of society started around the sharing of wine. That
Mm,
it,
true.
that's where it started. So it's embedded in society. It's a legal thing. It's something which is still encouraged, still accepted. Like you say, if you're celebrating, it's a glass of champagne, etc., etc., etc. And there's money in it. There's money in it, and of course,
Yeah, yeah, of
there's
course.
money, there's going to be advertising. But my final point on it is just a uh, quick example of this. So my wife was asking me about this podcast this week, and she said, "Oh, what are you talking about?" And we said, "Well, I'm going to talk about the sort of the normalization of it." And we got to talking about her, and we got to talking about me, and sort of where she's at. So one of the things my wife does is she teaches class. She teaches health fitness classes. She
Mm,
predominantly does things like yoga and Pilates and some personal training, and she's into her fitness and etc. etc. And there's this other thing that she's been wanting to do for a while. It's called Body Pump, and the company is Les Mills. I'm sure some people would have heard of it, others won't. But it's a much more physical. It involves weights. They talk about. It always makes me laugh because the instructors are all from New Zealand. They talk about time under tension, which apparently is the kind of key to it. I fucking hate it. She makes me do it all the time. It's really really hard, but she loves doing it. She loves being in the classes, but she's often thought about becoming an instructor. And she's finally plucked up the courage to do it. And next weekend, she's got her sort of accreditation. So she has to do a thing in front of a bunch of people.
amazing.
Yeah, so she's doing it next weekend. So it's really cool. And we were talking about, I said, well, it's good, we were talking about drinking and what have you. I said, well, you hardly drink at all, darling. You have one or two glasses of wine a week, which is fine. And I said, but the reality is, he said, you're married to somebody who is completely sober, who doesn't drink at all. I said, and who was quite passionate about not drinking, as you probably noticed. I said, I wonder what it would be like if I was still drinking. And she said, oh, I'd absolutely drink more. I'd absolutely be drinking more. And she said, and actually, if I think about it, she said, last night was a good example. We went out, took the dogs for a walk. It was a lovely evening. We came back, we watched a movie. She had a glass of wine. We had a curry. It was
Very
a
nice.
evening. But normally we'd have gone to the pub. And what she said, I think, which was really interesting, is she said, I would drink more, she said. And actually, when I think about it, if I knew that I had this thing coming up next weekend, I would start to resent the fact that I couldn't drink. I would go, she said, I remember that feeling. I'd start to think, oh shit, I can't drink next weekend. That's going to be really annoying. And then she said, do you know what? She said, I don't even think I'd be doing it. I don't think I'd be doing it. And what it reminded me of is this, we talk about giving up alcohol. The opposite is the truth. You're gaining your life. You gain so much. There's nothing to fucking give up. The myth of alcohol is just exasperating for me. People say, well, I'm good. Because if you, even my wife who has no issue drinking, she can moderate, she's fine, her life would have been curtailed enormously just by drinking a few more. So my final point on this is, yes, it's normalized. Yes, everybody does it, but you don't have to do it. And it's freeing, it's liberating. You would never have gone to fucking Vietnam, mate, if you were still drinking. You wouldn't have
No,
done
no, I
it.
wouldn't.
Too much like hard work. There's
Ah,
like, go walking in the bloody jungle. I want to go and
yeah,
get
visiting a temple, going cycling when it's like 35 degrees and humid. There's no way I would have wanted. And my God, how much you miss out on just incredible things. Just yeah,
Okay, look, we've said enough. This has probably gone on probably longer than we both would have thought, but we haven't gobbed off for a few
been
weeks.
a few weeks.
It
Yeah,
was a bit of a long one, and it's probably a bit rambling, but there you go. We're just warming up, getting back into it. So I'll probably leave it there for now. Is there anything else from you, Matt?
nothing from me. No, no. Thanks everyone. Sorry for the break, and give us your comments, thumbs up, subscribe, like all the stuff that we need to make this reach the biggest number of people as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. So thanks, everybody. As I always say, never quit quitting. It's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
It's goodbye from him.